please go. Please.
Okay, so we continue. Now we have the pleasure to welcome François Béguin, so from Paris Nord. So he was student of Christian. He defended in '99 at Labussière. We saw the picture just before. So his PhD was about vector fields in hyperbolic vector fields in dimension 3, and still now they are working together about another flow in dimension 3. But today François will talk about something different. So his talk is about a nice example of non-uniformly hyperbolic dynamical system from general relativity. So François.
Okay, thank you. So just before beginning the talk itself, I just remember the first day I met Christian. It was in '96 actually, and so I went to Dijon because I was looking for a PhD subject, and actually it's a mixed remembering, because for me it was quite comfortable. The reason was I went there and I had not slept the night before, and so I was mostly just thinking I must not get to sleep. It will be offensive. Christian was explaining me some maths, and I was just thinking I must not sit down. If I sit down, I will immediately get to sleep. And so please, Christian, if you feel asleep, just take a nap. It's not a problem. I will not be offended. You can even keep your camera on. Okay, I will share my screen if I... Can you see it?
Yes, yes, very good.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, so I know that Christian likes examples, so I wanted to speak on an example of dynamical system which I like very much, which is coming from general relativity, and which has not been very much studied by people doing dynamical systems. And I think it would be worth. Okay, so I will first try to explain you where the dynamical system comes from. Okay, if I can move the slides. Okay. Maybe. Okay, so just I will not say too much about general relativity, but just a few words. So in general relativities, you certainly know that the space-time is modeled by a four-dimensional manifold, and the manifold is equipped with a Lorentzian metric, which means that just it's a field of symmetric forms, but which are not positive definite, which are signature minus plus plus plus. Okay, and the point is that there is an equation which is called the Einstein equation, and which is a constraint on this metric. And the Einstein equation is written on the slide. You don't need to understand it at all. The only thing I want to say is that this is an equation which is relating the curvature of the Lorentzian metric, which is the left-hand side of the equation, to something which is described as the physical content of the universe. Okay, and maybe the most important thing you have to know is that this is one of the worst PDEs one can imagine. This is we are in high dimension 24. This is a second order PDE. This is a hyperbolic PDE. This has an infinite dimensional gauge group. So this is really terrible to study. And so this is the reason why people often focus on special classes of space-time which have many symmetries, and in order to simplify this PDE. And so the space-times I will be looking at are what are called spatially homogeneous spacetimes. Okay, what is a spatially homogeneous spacetime? It's a spacetime which you can write, where you can write the manifold M as the product of a time interval I by a space, a three-dimensional space, which is actually a Lie group G. And the metric, the Lorentzian metric is minus dt2, t is the time variable, plus ht, and ht, what we asked with ht is that it is left invariant. It is a Riemannian metric on the Lie group G, but it is left invariant, which translates the fact that the metric ht depends on t, so it changes with time, but saying that it is left invariant means that at 2 points of space, you just see exactly the same geometry. So it does not depend on space, it only depends on time in some sense. Okay, why are these spaces, these spacetimes interesting? There is an old conjecture, very vague conjecture from physicists based on heuristic arguments, which says more or less the following: is that when you take a generic spacetime and you go close to the initial singularity, meaning you go close to the Big Bang, the geometry of the spacetime should look like as if it was spatially homogeneous. It should also look like as if the spacetime was vacuum. Physicists say matter does not matter. And the first thing, the third statement in this kind of informal conjecture is that the geometry of a spatially homogeneous spacetime should oscillate in a chaotic way. So in some sense, the two first statements, spatially homogeneous, vacuum spatially homogeneous spacetimes, should be important because they should reflect the behavior of general spacetimes. And the third statement says that they should have a very interesting chaotic dynamics, meaning the geometry should behave in a chaotic way when we approach the initial singularity. Okay, so another reason why these spacetimes are interesting, and the reason why I'm speaking of them, is that if you think to a spatially homogeneous spacetime, so the metric G is just minus dt2, so something which is completely determined, plus ht, and ht is a family, one parameter family of Riemannian metric on a Lie group, which are left invariant. So this means that giving G is just the same as giving the function which maps. But ht is just a left invariant metric, so you just need to know it at one point of the Lie group. So for example, at the identity of the Lie group to be completely determined. So this means that this is just, G is just the same as giving the function t maps on the symmetric form at the identity. So this is just a one-dimensional function which is valued in a finite dimensional space. So so what is important is that in this context, the Einstein equation is a PDE, but it's actually it's a fake PDE because it's a PDE on a one variable function, because the metric just depends on one variable, which is time. So so this a PDE on a one variable function is just an ODE, an ordinary differential equation. So in this context, the Einstein equation should be a vector field in finite dimension. Okay, so now a non-trivial problem is to write this ODE, but I will completely skip this, and I will directly give you the ODE. So you just have you need to believe me. If you don't believe me, then you can read. But here are the ODEs, and I don't. It's quite, as you can see, it's quite horrible. So I know that Christian likes example, but does not like formulas at all. So that's very bad birthday present to put all these formulas on the left. So here is a terrible system of 6 ODEs. So you have 6 variables, N1, N2, N3, theta 1, theta 2, theta 3, and you have some ODEs which you don't have to look at actually. You should not look too much at them, but you have a system of 6 ODEs, and you also have a constraint equation which is relating the 6 variables. But just to say a word, so this ODEs exactly translates the Einstein equation. So this means that vacuum spatially homogeneous spacetimes are exactly the solutions of this ODE system. So studying the solution of this, studying this ODE system is exactly the same as studying vacuum, the behavior of the geometry of vacuum spatially homogeneous spacetimes. So just to say a word about what are the variables. So you have 2 groups of 3 variables, N1, N2, and 3. So these are functions of time, and they actually describe the intrinsic geometry of the space-like size. And theta 1, theta 2, theta 3 describe the extrinsic geometry, so just describe the second fundamental form. Okay, so this is a system of ODE. I just, you can, I just write, this is exactly the same. I just express them as a vector field. So, say it again, I just repeat. So, the spacetime we are interested in, vacuum spatially homogeneous spacetimes, are exactly the orbits of this vector field. So, even if you, I don't like formulas either, but if you want to understand the behavior of this spacetime, you need to study this vector field. And I also find that this is something interesting, is that you know, we will see that this vector field has a behavior which is very degenerated and very complicated. And one thing you immediately want to say in many cases is that, okay, it's complicated, but if you perturb a bit, then it will become much simpler. But here you really cannot. This is not the game. This system is coming from physics, and if you want to study the physical system, you cannot change the system. You have to study this one, even if the formula are looking very bad. You have to cope with them. Okay, so we'll try to cope with it. Okay, so we have this vector field, and so you have the constraint equation. So this is a vector field on 6 variables, but actually there is a constraint equation which is defining a fine-dimensional quadric in R6. So this is a vector field on a 5-dimensional manifold, which happens to be a quadric, and which is non-compact, by the way. Okay, so my goal will be to try to convince you that this ugly formula actually hide some interesting dynamics. And I really think that the attractor, which is defined by, which is driving the dynamics of this vector field, should be studied much more by dynamicists, because it's a very interesting example. Okay, so let's try. Okay, when you look at the formula, even if you don't understand many things, there are at least 3 immediate remarks that you should do. The first one, which is not so interesting, is the fact that if you permute the indices 1 to 3, then everything is left invariant. Okay, this is not very useful, but this will help a bit. The second thing, which is more interesting, is that everything is homogeneous. Actually, everything is quadratic. So a consequence of that, of course, will be that we will be able to projectivize. And the third thing, which is actually the most important thing, is that if you look at the 3/3 coordinates of the vector field, the derivative of n1 is proportional to n1. So this means that along the trajectory, the sign of n1 will be preserved. And in particular, if n1 is 0, it will remain 0 all along the trajectory. And of course, the same is true for n2 and n3. And this will be one of the most important things in the sequel. Okay, so let's try to start studying this vector field. Okay, so the fact that it is that everything is quadratic just says that we can projectivize. So we just project everything. Everything is a priori in R6, but we can project it on the projective space RP5. And for some reason, it's better to project not on RP5, but the twofold cover because you want to keep orientation. But no problem. But the thing, yes.
So what is the Lie group here in these equations?
The thing is that the Lie group depends. Actually, what I will not say is that
topologically, is it contractible though? Are we assuming?
No. Actually, what is really important is not really the Lie group; it's the Lie algebra, and yes. The Lie algebra type actually depends on the sign of n1, n2, n3.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. So, but one important thing, one nice thing with these coordinates is that we are studying all the Lie groups together, all the Lie algebra together. And actually, the attractor will correspond to the simplest possible Lie algebras, that is R3 on Heisenberg. And what we are interested in are the most general Lie algebra, that is SO3 or SU2 and SL2. And in some sense, we will prove that the orbits corresponding to the most complicated Lie algebra will accumulate on the orbits defined by the simplest one. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so we can project everything and we gain one dimension, of course, because we compact the 5-dimensional quadric in R6. We get a 4-dimensional quadric in RP5 or S5. Okay, and of course we lose parametrization, but that's not such a big problem. Okay, so as I said, the most important thing is this invariance of the signs of the NIs. So obviously, from the vector field, the sign of each of the NI is constant along the trajectory, but the sign of the NIs actually define a stratification of the phase space. And so a trajectory which starts in a stratum will remain in this stratum. And why is this important? The reason why this is important is that because the dimension of the stratum, of the strata, are not always the same. And so the strategy is to start by studying the smaller strata, because this should give some low dimensional dynamics, and this should be easy to understand. Okay, and so this is exactly what we will do. So let's start by the smallest stratum. Of course, the smallest stratum is when n1, n2, and 3 is 0, and the biggest is when they are non-zero. Okay, so the first stratum is n1, n2, and 3 equal to 0. So we have 3 equations. So the phase space, the whole phase space is 4-dimensional. So if we have 3 equations, this gives a 1-dimensional stratum. And actually, if you just look at the constraint equation and you plug in n1 equal n2 equal n3 equal 0, you end up with this equation, θ1, θ2 plus θ2, θ3 plus θ3, θ1 equal to 0. So this is just a conic in a 2-dimensional projective plane spanned by θ1, θ2, θ1, θ2, θ3. And so we have a conic. And it is known as the Kastner circle because it describes some space-time called Kastner spacetimes, which were known long before. Okay, so we have the smallest stratum is a circle, and if we look at the vector field on this stratum, and if we put in n1 equal n2 equal n3 equal 0 in this vector field, the vector field actually, so the first three coordinates just vanish. All these things here vanish. And what remains is that the derivative of θ1 is proportional to θ1, and same thing for θ2, same thing for θ3, and the coefficient is the same for the three variables. So it just means that x is radial in R6, but when you projectivize, x being radial just means that x is 0 when you projectivize. So this means that every point on the Kastner circle is a singularity of our vector field in the projective space. So, as I said, the strategy was to start by studying the smallest strata. And so for the first stratum, it's extremely easy because we just get a circle, and this circle is just made of fixed points. All the points of the circle correspond to singularities of the equation of the vector field. Okay, so now when you have a singularity, the first thing you try to do is to linearize, to look at the eigenvalues, and so you just do it. So well, I will not detail everything, but of course there is one eigenvalue. If you pick one point on the Kastner circle, so it's a singularity. Of course, since it belongs to a circle of singularity, there is a central direction, which is just the direction of the Kastner circle. But then if you look, you also have 3 over eigendirection, which are the direction of n1, n2, and n3. And if you just see, the eigenvalues are just appearing here. And if you just compute a bit, you realize that there are 2 stable at every point, there are 2 stable directions and 1 unstable direction. Okay, so at each point there is one central direction. Well, okay, I made a picture. So you have this Kastner circle here, which is made of fixed points, of singular points, and each point has 2 stable eigenvalue and 1 unstable eigenvalue in red. So the stable are in green and the unstable are in red. Okay. Actually, I cheated a bit because this is not completely true. What is true is this is true except at 3. There are 3 special points which are called the top points and which are denoted usually by T1, T2, T3. And at these points, actually, there is 1 stable and 1 unstable eigenvalue which vanish. And actually, this is because the stable and the unstable direction are exchanged exactly at this point. So the picture near the top point should be like this. So you have the stable direction which is exchanged with the unstable one, and vice versa. And so the global picture is something like this on the right. You still have, at each point, you still have 3 directions, but 2 of them, at every point, 2 of them are stable and 1 of them is unstable, but they switch. And of course, when they switch, then you get a very bad point, but because you get a point which has 3 neutral directions. And this point will create many problems. Okay, so you have this circle of
the way you've drawn it, there's only I see. There are 3 neutral, including the direction of the circle.
Yeah.
And 1
actually,
contracted.
what I do is yes, because there's a circle. Yeah, and of course the picture should be in higher dimension, but I cannot. So this is why for each direction, I just draw one separate.
It's a 4-dimensional picture, is that?
Yeah, it should be in dimension 4. Okay, and concerning the eigenvalues, there is something which is something else which is very important. Is that at every point, the contraction in the stable is stronger than the expansion in the unstable ones. The contraction always dominates the expansion, and this is true except at these three very annoying points, T1, T2, T3, which were okay. Well, of course, you have neutral direction, so 0 is equal to 0. Okay, so now we have to go up in the stratum, in the strata. We have to study slightly bigger strata. So we let one of the ni's being non-zero. So let's say n1 and n3 are still 0, equal to 0, but let's say n2 is positive. So you look at the constraint equation and you plug in n1 equal n3 equals 0, and you get this equation. And this equation, if you add up n2 strictly positive, is just the equation of an hemisphere. I mean, this is a two-dimensional quadric, and topologically, this is an hemisphere which is bounded by the Kästner circle. Okay, so the picture is more or less like this. You have the Kästner circle, which is in the projective space n2 equal n3 equal n2, n1 equals 0. And in the direction n2, you have some kind of hemisphere, which is just put on this circle. And the nice thing is that on this quadric, it's still possible to understand, to compute exactly the orbits. The reason is, so you have to think a bit, but the reason is that if you look at in the plane n1 equal n3 equals 0, you can check, you just plug in, you look during some time at the equations on the left-hand side, and you can check that the plane θ2 plus alpha θ1 plus 1 minus alpha θ3 equals 0 is invariant under the flow. And this is for every alpha. So this means that actually you have a pencil of planes. You have a pencil of two planes which are invariant under the flow. And so the situation is more or less is actually exactly as what is depicted on the left. You have a pencil of planes here, of two planes, which are invariant under the flow. Now the hemisphere drawn in blue, so with the hemisphere is invariant under the flow, and since it's one-dimensional, it's actually an orbit. So, and what you see is that on this hemisphere in blue here, so it's foliated by the intersection with the pencil of planes, and the intersections are orbits. And actually what you realize is that every orbit on this hemisphere is an orbit which is connecting one point of the Kästner circle to another one. So this is a saddle connection. Remember that the points of the Kästner circle are saddles. And so we have a kind of we have an hemisphere which is foliated by saddle connections between the points on the circle, on the equator, in some sense.
So the tangency are your singular points?
The tangencies are exactly the two of the three annoying points. So the tangencies here, since we are in the stratum, and I don't remember. So this should be T2 and T3 because N2 equal N2. Yes, and so let's summarize. So the stratum is an hemisphere bounded by the Kästner circle, And every trajectory on this stratum is an heteroclinic connection between 2 points on the Kastner circle. Okay, so I just redraw the picture, and here on the bottom, what you have is just the projection on the plane. So you just look from above. You look at this picture from above, and you see exactly, and as Christian was saying, the tangencies are 2 of the 3 points, T1 and T3, depends. Maybe there is an error. Okay, but of course, now, so this is when one of the variables. Now, of course, the same is true when you permute the 3 indices. So when you permute the 3 indices, so you get something. You get the same kind of picture. You have 2 of us hemispheres, and all of them are foliated also by saddle connections. But the saddle connections are, in some sense, not in the same direction. So, so you get in projection, you should think that in projection on the plane, the 3 pictures on the bottom are just on the same plane. So you really have many saddle connections. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, and if you look a bit at the picture on the right, you realize that if you take any, let's take for example the left picture. The orbits are starting from 1/3 of the circle and arriving on the 2 other thirds. But when you permute the indices, of course the orbits start from the other 2/3. So the thing is that if you take any point on the Kastner circle, here, for example, there is 1 orbit starting from this point. There is 1 saddle connection starting from this point and arriving here. If you take a point here, there is an orbit starting from it, etc. So for every point in the Kastner circle, there is exactly 1 orbit, which is, if you take any point P, there is 1 orbit which is starting at P and connecting P to another point on the Kastner circle, which we will call f of P. And this defines the map from the Kastner circle to the Kastner circle, which is called the Kastner map. Okay, so I just drawn here a picture which is quite schematic. So I just put the Kastner circle and the free direction. I recall that stable is in green and unstable or in unstable is in red. And now you should think you start at 1 point P, then you follow, then the unstable direction is connected to the stable direction of another point, which we call f of P. And then at f of P, there is 1 unstable direction, and there is a connection with another point, which is f square of P. And then there is an unstable direction, which is connected to the stable of f to the 3 of P, etc., etc. And so, so you have a big bunch of saddle connections. And of course, one important thing is to understand what is exactly this map F. Okay, actually the map F has a very simple description, because you see, if you just in projection, you just get 3 cases, but they are very easy. And actually the simple geometric description is the following. You have your circle, your Kastner circle on the right here. You have 3 special points, T1, T2, T3. You draw a triangle which is tangent to these 3 points. Now you take a point P. You look at the vertex of the triangle which is close to P. You draw the line going from this passing through this vertex and P. It intersects the circle at another point, and this point is f of P. Okay, so this gives a simple description, a geometric description of the map. And you can iterate, of course. If you have a point P, you draw the line here, you arrive to f of P, the vertex is here, you draw the line, you arrive to f square of P, f3, f4, etc. And well, what this picture suggests, is that this map seems to be quite complicated, to have a rich dynamics. And actually, it's very easy to see because it's quite easy to check that this map is non-uniformly expanding. I mean, it maps 1/3 of the circle to the 2/3, so it's more or less clear. And actually, since it is non-uniformly expanding, it's topologically conjugated to alpha is mapped to -2 alpha. It's not 2 alpha, it's -2 alpha because it's orientation reversing. The conjugacy is a bit singular, but the map still has a unique, absolutely invariant, absolutely continuous invariant measure. This measure is of infinite mass because of the non-uniform expansion. Okay, so well, just so you have this system that I described. So the union of the circle and all these saddle connections is what is called. It has been known for half a century, and it's called the mixed master attractor. And so topologically, this is just the union of the circle and 3 hemispheres. Actually 6 hemispheres because you have the sign of the Ni. Okay, but this is completely foliated by saddle connections. Okay, and actually it's not, so the picture on the left is very schematic. Actually, it's not in the right dimension. It's not really possible to make a realistic picture. But there is a way of drawing a realistic picture, which I made on the right, is to not to consider the mixed master, the system itself, but to take the quotient by the permutation of the indices. So you take the quotient by S3, and believe me, you get something like this shell shape thing on the right. So now the circle is actually has become, since you take the quotient by S3 and S3 is not acting freely, the quotient of the circle is not a circle but a segment, and the saddle connections are going around. And you perfectly see here that the map is 2 to 1. The Kastner map, which is describing the saddle connection, is 2 to 1. Okay. So, I think that when you see such a system, it should immediately make you think to a well-known example, which is Bowen-Tsai attractor, because in some sense we have the same phenomenon. So I recall you, I think all of you know what is Bowen-Tsai attractor. So Bowen-Tsai attractor is just you take 2 saddle fixed points in the plane, and P1, P2, and you assume that there are saddle connections. So the unstable manifold of P1 is connected to the stable of P2 and vice versa. And the point is that you also assume that the contraction is stronger than the expansion. And so now if you take an orbit inside the eye, it's accumulating this cycle of connections. And it's a well-known example because it's well-known as an example where the Birkhoff average do not converge just because the orbits spend a very long time near P1, then go very much closer to P2 and spend a longer and longer time close to P2, etc., etc. And in some sense, Here we have a kind of generalization of this thing because we have a circle. Sorry. We have a circle of saddles, and all these saddles are connected. There are saddles connection between all the points. Every point in the circle K is connected to another one, and you have, of course, you have cycles because the map describing the connections has many periodic orbits. Okay, so well, this is if this is really pertinent, this should be quite complicated generalization, because the point is that instead of having only two saddles in the Bowen eye, here you have a full circle of saddle points, and also the map, which is describing the saddle connections, which point is connected to which point is connected, is chaotic. Sorry, it's a very complicated map. Conjugated to alpha goes to -2 alpha. And another thing which makes it more complicated than Bowen's eye attractor is the fact that the ratio between the stable and unstable eigenvalues is not uniform, because it vanishes at the three special tau points. Okay, so the conjecture has been from 50 years that it, in some sense, it does behave like a generalization of the Bowen's eye attractor. That is that it's really
François,
the
I need
orbits.
something.
Yes.
It's an attractor?
Yeah,
There's
I
the
will
orbit?
speak after. It's not clear. It has been. It's been 50 years that everybody calls it an attractor, but it was not clear until quite recently that this is an attractor.
Because it is a codimension too.
It is of codimension 2, yeah. So, so in some sense, the goal is to prove that it does, in some sense, behave as a big bunch of Bowen's eye attractors. Okay, so let's, yes. So indeed, I wrote the Mixmaster attractor is an attractor. So this was proved for, actually, this was proved only, the proof ended in, so 4 years ago. And so the result is, actually, this is, this is an attractor in the sense of measure. That is, it attracts almost every orbit. So almost every orbit in the phase space is attracted by the Mixmaster. And what is a bit deceiving is that the proof is, does not give you, in some sense, any information, because this is a proof by contradiction. The thing is just, you consider one orbit, it has to accumulate somewhere, and you prove that if it accumulates, if the accumulation point is not in the Mixmaster, then you get a contradiction. But so it does not tell you anything about how the orbit would accumulate on the Mixmaster.
So the
just
statement is almost every orbit has its omega limit on that picture?
Yes, the distance is going to 0. The distance to the picture is going to 0.
But there's
Okay,
no
so
statement about the rate at which the distance goes to 0, for example.
yes, the rate, yes, actually the rate is exponential.
It is exponential.
Yeah.
And there are orbits which escape, exceptional orbit which escape.
Yes. Actually, there is a, so, well, actually there are two different cases. Everything is very well understood. That is, there are exceptional orbits which do not are not attracted, but we know them exactly and we know how they behave. But in the case where you have mixed signs, then actually the statement is quite abstract. So this is just in measure, and you don't know exactly what is happening. Okay, so let me try to formalize what we would like to prove. I said that I would like to prove that this does behave like a bunch of Bowenzi attractor. Okay, so we have to just to put one formal definition. So let's consider a point P. So from a point P, there is an heteroclinic sequence, an infinite heteroclinic sequence, which is starting from this point. There is the orbit connecting P to f of P, then f of P to f square of P, etc. And so this is an infinite sequence of saddle connections. And so I just say that an orbit shadows this heteroclinic chain if, okay, there are points, there are sometimes T1, T2, T3, so that at these times, the orbit is close to f of P, f square of P, etc. And between these times, the Hausdorff distance between the segment of orbit and the saddle connection is going to 0. Okay, exactly what is depicted on this picture. Okay, so it has been so actually it was considered by physicists like something more or less clear for 50 years, even if there was also a statement going in the opposite direction. But it was a bit recently that there have been some mathematical works on this. So there have been some works by several people, including in particular writer and Zubowitz. And the result was with my student Tom Dutilleul. And so the result is the following. If you take an heteroclinic chain, so almost every heteroclinic chain is shadowed by some orbits, and actually it's shadowed by a three-dimensional set of orbits. So if you task for almost every point P in the circle, if you look at the heteroclinic chain starting at P, it will be accumulated by some real orbits.
So it's some kind of stable manifold?
Yes, yes. You construct them as stable manifolds here. As a Piécine manifolds, actually. And yes, just like in Piécine, actually you redo some kind of Piécine theory to prove that the union of all these stable Piécine manifolds has positive Lebesgue dimension, Lebesgue measure in the full space. So okay, so informally, this means that if you pick one orbit at random, then you don't know what will happen, but you know that with positive probability, what will happen is what you expect. That is, it will accumulate on some heteroclinic chain. Okay, just to give a geometric consequence to go back to the initial problem. The reason why the system was studied is that a geometric consequence is that if you pick a spatially homogeneous spacetime at random, then with positive probability, what will happen is that if you look at the space-like slice, they will contract anyway. But if you look at the geometry of the space-like slices, it will oscillate. That is, the direction in which it will be the most curved will oscillate. It will be round, and then it will expand in one direction, then will become round, then expand in another direction, then become round, and etc., and so on and so forth. And in a chaotic way, there can be periodic behaviors, there can be aperiodic behaviors, etc. Okay, and so you can find so you can really translate the dynamical behavior to geometric consequences for the spacetimes. Okay. Okay, maybe I will very quickly say some words about the proof. Actually, the proof is really very complicated. The proof is something like almost 200 pages long. It's really awful. And okay, just
But you have this
really a few
phenomenon
words.
of non-statistic of the Bowen eye?
Yes, but I will, yes. But it's not clear exactly what yes, what is true is that obviously this implies that the Birkhoff average do not converge. But more precise things are not easy to check. So the first thing you have to do is to analyze the dynamics near a point of the Kastner circle. And actually, this is by itself, this is very difficult because the dynamics is very the vector field is very degenerated because there is a line of singularities. So in particular, there is no normal form known, etc. So you have more or less to do it by brute force using Grunwald lemma several times, etc. So, but what you get at the end is that for every point P, there is a neighborhood V of P, so that the distance to the mixmaster is contracted in a superlinear way, and there is almost no drift tangential to the attractor. But of course, the problem is that both the side of this neighborhood and the strength of the contraction decreases when P goes to the free byte points, which are creating all the problems. These bad guys. So and then of course once you have done that near one point, you have to try to combine the estimates at P, f of P, f square of P, etc. But of course the problem is that since the size of the neighborhood depends on the distance from P to the tau points, you can only do that if it depends on how fast your orbit will go close to the tau points. And okay, very quickly, there is one very important ingredient in this thing is that there is a parametrization. Not only the Kastner map is conjugated to theta goes to -2 theta, but it's also conjugated to the Gauss map. There is a parametrization so that the Kastner map F is conjugated to in this parametrization to the Gauss map. So this is very helpful because this allows to use some results on continued fraction to control the speed at which Fn of P will approach the tau points for generic P. And I will just state the condition under which one can prove that the heteroclinic chain is shadowed. It's a condition on the continued fraction. If you have a point P, the integers appearing on the continued fraction are, I denoted them by K1, K2, K3. And the condition is that it's not the usual, what is interesting is that it's not a usual condition such that the integers are growing subpolynomially or something like this. It's an unusual condition, which is the fact that the integer appearing at step n+1 should be controlled by the previous one. And this is not easy to prove that this condition is generic, but it is. Actually, I did not know how to prove that, and Sébastien Guézel explained me some arguments. Okay. So I will not say more on the proof just because it's time. I just would like to state a few problems and questions about this system. So of course, the obvious question is that we know that with the orbits which are shadowing some heteroclinic chain have positive Lebesgue measure. So we don't know if it has full Lebesgue measure. So and I have really no idea on how to try to prove that because all the analysis is completely local. So I don't know. But of course, this is the most obvious question. I think another interesting question, which is related to what Christian was. Clearly an example of systems where the Birkhoff average do not converge. But I think that this is an example of system where the Birkhoff average are behaving in a very bad way, meaning that, of course, for the Bowen I, the Birkhoff average are not converging, but they are not behaving in such a bad way because the accumulation points are just located on two ergodic measures, a combination of two ergodic measures supported on P1 and P2. Here, a priori, the set, if you take a generic point, the Birkhoff average should accumulate on a very weak set of ergodic measures. And I think it would be interesting to compute the statistical complexity of this system in the sense of defined by Pierre Berger, what he calls emergence. But anyway, to understand, I mean, better the statistical behavior of this system. I think well, as I said, the system is coming from physics, and if you want to study the physical problem, you cannot change the system. But I think that for purely dynamical system purpose, this is an interesting example, and I think it would be worth to build kind of simpler models, more geometrical models of this system. This system, in particular, you can get rid of the 3 points T1, T2, T3, and you will get a system which will have a very complicated statistical behavior, and you can have several types of behavior, and I think it's really this kind of very complicated system which is interesting. And of course, the last thing, but I think. The last thing is what happens for generic perturbation. Clearly, the system is not robust. I mean, it's not stable because if you perturb, then the circle of singularities will be destructed. But it will remain an attractor, and it will remain an attractor with many singularities, with certainly some connections will remain, because there are many of them, so most of them will disappear, but some of them will remain. And I don't know what happens. I really, I try to think a bit, and I really don't know what happens for perturbation. And I think this should be something interesting, just as the bifurcation of the Shilnikov system gives them interesting systems. Okay, so I do think that this is an interesting example which should be studied. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So thanks, François. So do you have some questions or some comments?
In fact, I have questions, if I can.
Yeah.
So if you take a generic point in the basin, it goes somewhere, but this somewhere is generic for the invariant absolutely continuous measure on the circle?
Yes. Actually, the statement is a bit stronger than what I said. What should be said is that if you take a set A in the circle with positive measure, then the orbits which are accumulating on the heteroclinics starting from this set as positive measure too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. By the way, one thing which also makes the statistical behavior even more complicated to study is that even for the map, the Kastner map itself, it does not. It has an invariant measure, but this measure has infinite mass. So first of all, you cannot really.
This measure is ergodic?
Yes, but you cannot really study Birkhoff average. You have to study ratios of Birkhoff averages.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Is the basin the whole phase space? I didn't quite. You said something in the beginning about attracting all
It's not known.
geometries. It's not known.
It's not known. The only thing is that you kind of reduce Pearson theory to prove that that's a positive measure, but that's all.
Is it conjecture that the basin should be the whole?
Well, it's a conjecture, but I don't know if I believe it.
Ah, okay, cool.
But it has total mass.
No, he's saying he
No.
doesn't believe that the basin
Oh.
has total mass in the whole phase space.
There are numerical experiments for that.
There are many numerical experiments, but I think none of them is worth something because this is really no, this is really one of the worst systems for numerical experiments because you see you have to, this is the contraction is superlinear. So and the time you spend near the singularities is growing over exponentially. So and the drift is very small, but small drift, can break everything. And the only thing, I mean, for finite time, it's of course for if you just want to check whether heteroclinic chain is followed by during a finite time, this is completely obvious. This is just continuity of the flow.
No, but
The problem is for infinite time.
if it models the Big Bang, we are the numerical experiment.
Yeah. Also about this comment, I think it's clear the physical consequences of all this are not clear at all because actually, so there are some heuristic arguments saying that the non-homogeneous space should behave as if it was spatially homogeneous, but it's not quantitative at all. So it's not even clear that the non-homogeneity disappears before we see the quantum effects or things like this. And it's not even, so even if you have oscillations in the theoretical model, it's not clear that these oscillations appear when the model is valid. It could appear so close to the Big Bang that the model is no more valid at all because of quantum effects and things like this. So it's it's physics, but very theoretical physics.
Okay, so we are in the numerical experiment, but at that time we are close to the singularity. It's what you mean. So Lorenzo is saying that we should finish now. So thanks, Francois. So I think now we have time for toast. I don't know if Lorenzo can say something about that.
I think that, well, unfortunately, we need to open a new session because, with Zoom, with that many people, you need to split. And then, sorry, let me stop.